In this video, you're going to learn about the differences between Zapier and Integromat, two really popular workflow automation tools. Now, this is something I get asked a lot, which is why I'm making a video. And if I had to summarize this in as few words as possible, kind of a too long didn't watch version of this video, they're kind of just different ways of achieving the same thing. So you can do more in Integromat, it's just a lot more complicated to use. So Zapier has more integrations, it's been around longer, it's a bit more newbie friendly, whereas Integromat has a really big suite of tools that allow you to do lots of really complex stuff, but it kind of feels like it's been designed by a developer. That can mean it's pretty hard to use, especially if you're new to this world. It also kind of feels like you need to know how code works to be able to use the more complex tools in Integromat. But in my opinion, you're best off just knowing how to use both tools. If you had to pick one or the other and you're just starting out, I'm going to say Zapier, and then maybe later you can get into Integromat. But now let's actually just dig into the differences between the two tools. I'm Jimmy from jimmyrose.me and Content Snare, and if you're interested in workflow automation and how to automate parts of your business and life, hit that subscribe button below. I release regular videos on the topic. But yeah, let's get into it. So the first and most obvious criteria here are the integrations. Now, Zapier definitely has more integrations than Integromat, but Integromat still has loads. Really, it's just going to come down to the apps you're actually using. There's probably a higher chance that Zapier will integrate with all the apps you're using just because there are so many, but that doesn't really matter if Integromat has all the ones you're using. So here's how you can check. When you visit the Zapier site, you can come up here to explore and go to apps that work with Zapier, and you'll get this list of all the different apps that Zapier uses. Just start typing things in here. So if you're using ActiveCampaign, for example, you'll see it's there and you can click through and read all about it. And similarly over at Integromat, if you come up to the header here and go apps and services, you'll get a list of all the different apps they integrate with. Obviously there are still loads there. And again, you can search to find out what apps are actually there. So if you just go through this process using a few of the apps you are already using or that you want to integrate with, this is a good place to start. Now, one thing that you need to take into account here is just because both services, both Zapier and Integromat, integrate with the same app, it doesn't mean that that integration works the same way. And I'll give you an example here. So looking at Airtable on Zapier, right? So this is the Airtable page for Zapier. If we scroll down and look at what triggers and actions we can use in our workflows, we've got new record in view, create record, update record, and find record. So there's 5 there, right? So if we jump over to the Integromat version of the same page and scroll down and see what we can see, we've got watch records, which is pretty much the same as a new record being added, but this is also going to fire a trigger when a record is updated. So it kind of works differently. So these are the kind of things you have to know when you're trying to evaluate which tool to use. And you can see here, we've also got the ability to delete a record, which didn't exist in the Zapier version, right? So it's just something you're going to have to look at for each app that you're using. I've got another example here, Typeform, a popular forms tool. If we have a look, there's only one trigger in Zapier. So when a new entry is submitted, and for most people, that's all you're going to need. However, the Integromat version of this has all kinds of things. So we've got watch responses, which is the same as, when a new response is added. But we can also create new forms using Integromat if you do want to do that. There's lots of different things here. They're all a bit more advanced than what most people are going to need, but there are more options there. So again, just another example of why you need to look at the apps you're using and what you actually want to do with them. You can't just say, oh, Zapier and Integromat both have an integration, tick. You actually have to look at how the integration works. The reason this is so important is because depending on the workflow you want to create, it might not even be possible in one of the tools. So this is a very simple workflow I've created that runs over every single row in a Google spreadsheet and runs a bunch of operations. The point here though is that Integromat has this ability to get all the rows from a spreadsheet, whereas that's not actually possible in Zapier at all. So if we have a look at the Zapier Google Sheets page here and scroll down and go to searches, We do have the ability to find many spreadsheet rows, which is essentially the same thing, but this one actually has a 10 max limit and this one's 20. So if you need to go over more rows than that, then you can't really do it with Zapier unless you want to use some kinds of workarounds where we're getting into pretty advanced territory there. Now let's look at the features of both platforms. Now there are loads of features in both Zapier and Integromat, so I'm not going to dig into all of them, otherwise you'll be here all day watching this video. But there are a couple of important things to note. The first is historical data. So when you create a new workflow in Integromat, if we were going to fire a workflow when a new person gets added to our CRM, you actually get the option to process historical data, so we can start on a specific date or just try and grab everything that's currently in our account. You don't get that option with Zapier, so if you do need to process historical stuff, you need to kind of know some workarounds. So that's one difference. Both services also have a lot of different built-in apps. When you are creating workflows in Zapier, you can see a few of these here. So we've got like the ability to format data and things like this. If you search by Zapier, you find a lot of the different built-in apps. So we've got this lead scoring one, data storage ability, URL shortening. So there are a lot of different tools built into Zapier. A lot of these are pretty much replicated in Integromat, or if not very similar. They're just added in different ways. So if we were to look in here, we could search RSS, which was one of the built-in apps in Zapier, and you can see it's there in Integromat as well. Where Integromat really excels are these tools down here. So we're about to get a little bit developer-y. These are kind of advanced tools. Like some of these terms like iterator might not make sense unless you've done some work in the development space before. So that's what I mean about Integromat. It's definitely more powerful, but you kind of have to know, there's a bit more knowledge you need to make it work. So, but in an iterator, for example, is if you have, 20 Google spreadsheet rows, you might iterate over all of those rows to do something with the data and, do another action in another app for all of those 20 rows. That's what iteration means. There's just a lot of different apps here that you can use in Integromat, and there isn't really an equivalent in Zapier without kind of workarounds. We've got different tools here as well, but a lot of these like sleep, so delaying execution for a specified period of time. Zapier has Delay by Zapier as a built-in app. So, sometimes there are things that you'll find in both, and a lot of these things are just done in different ways in both apps. So a lot of these different tools you've got here, and some of these transformers they say where they're talking about like matching regex, a lot of that is actually handled in Zapier through what's called the formatter. So if we add this step in here, this is actually lots of little different apps built into one. So we've got numbers apps, utilities, dates, times. So there's a lot of overlap in these features, not direct one-to-one comparison, but this is why I think sometimes it's important to know both tools, because some things just won't be possible in one or the other. The next major category is usability, and while Integromat is more powerful, I feel like everything is just more difficult to do in it. So Zapier here, you can see a very simple workflow when someone enters a contact form. We're putting their information in a Google spreadsheet. And creating this workflow is fairly simple. We're basically just mapping in data that came from the form. So in that form, people are submitting their name, email, and maybe a message. And so we're just clicking in here and mapping in the data that comes from that previous step. In Integromat, I just find the process a little bit more annoying. So if we were to add a Google Sheets module here, most of the setup is fairly similar. You can see here we've had to choose a spreadsheet, a sheet, and it's fairly similar over here. So we've chosen the spreadsheet and then a worksheet, and then the data that we're going to put into that sheet. And mapping data is fairly similar. You click in here and you can scroll through and find the email address if you want to put that in that field. But notice there's no way to search through here. So when you have lots and lots of different data that you're trying to map in, it's a bit easier in Zapier because you can literally search for email and click that. But in here, you'd have to scroll through a list, and there can be hundreds of things here sometimes. So that's just one small example. Another thing that kind of annoys me with Integromat, if I click off that by accident and click back in, all of that information is going to be lost and you've got to do it all again, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it happens to me a lot, and some of these forms can take quite a long time to fill out. So it actually wastes a lot of my time and is actually a really big annoyance for me. So this is what I mean by just there's some things in Integromat that I just don't really like as much. And you'll also notice when mapping functions in here, there's a lot of different tabs across the top. So we can switch to functions, and this gets quite developer-y. You can see here, like we're going to try and run functions within these cells, and that's actually super powerful, but also like kind of difficult to use if you've never done this kind of work before. Like this is very much things that I would expect only a developer to know how to use. So we've got date and time functions and working with arrays. This is all actually really powerful and nice to have, but yeah, it's just for newbies. I don't really recommend getting into this side of things. Some of these things are actually replicated in Zapier, but they're another step, which is that little formatter one we covered before. So if you wanted to run some formulas on date and times, you can do that with the formatter, whereas over here, you're probably going to do it with some functions. A positive of doing it with a function is that it doesn't use up a task in your account. You'll learn when we get into pricing later that Integromat uses operations, Zapier uses tasks. Now this isn't using up an operation on your account, whereas this action here in Zapier is actually using up a task and contributes to your pricing. And the final usability thing, I think, are filters. So if we wanted to have an extra step in this workflow that said, we only want to add people to this sheet who are named Bob, we could add a filter and say, if their name contains Bob, then we'll continue and add them to the sheet. Now the same kind of thing exists in Integromat, but it's done here. So you set up a filter on that link, you give it a name, so named Bob, and then we'd say the first name contains Bob. And these do operate pretty much the exact same way. I guess I just find the filters in Integromat bleed out a little bit. If you've got a complex workflow with lots of things going on, like there's only a couple in this one, but you can get some really pretty complex workflows going on. And then the only difference between a normal link and the fact that there's a filter is that icon. So I don't know, like it does work, but I feel like filters could be represented better. Next, let's look at testing the workflows you've created and being able to dig into the history of data that has run through the workflows before. There are some pretty big differences between the two tools here. So when you're creating a Zap, you can pretty much only ever test one thing at a time. So we've got our trigger here. We run the test as the final step, so we can pull in data from Typeform. Now, if we want to go through and test this action, then we have to go to here and run the test again. And if we have more actions, you have to step through them one at a time to run the tests. Whereas in Integromat, you can just run like an individual module by right-clicking it. But what I really like is the fact that you can just run this and watch the process in action, which is really cool. Zapier doesn't have this ability to actually watch the thing happening in real time like this. So you can see there, it's running multiple actions for all the different rows in that sheet. And you can see it's just counting this one up. For each one that fires, we can see this filter's counting up and this action's counting up. So that's a really cool feature. While I'm here, if I click into one of these bubbles here, you can inspect the different data that's been running through this workflow as we watch that tick up. So you can open and see the row number that was edited and what data was edited. Again, a little bit developer-y, hard to understand for newbies, but I also don't know of an easier way to do this, to be honest. But it's kind of cool that we can actually even get that data while testing. So in Zapier, you can't really do that. There's no way to watch this thing run and see the data that's running through it. Basically, it's only once you've turned this workflow on, once you've done all your testing on individual blocks, you turn the Zap on and then you can jump over to task history. Now it looks like this one has never run before, so I'm just going to select all of the Zaps that have run in my account. And to analyze the data that has been flowing between these, let's open one of these that's been successful. and you can see all the data that has come into this trigger. So yeah, obviously this one looks a little bit developer-y as well, but we're talking about debugging workflows here, so that is more of an advanced topic. But what I really like about Zapier that you don't get in Integromat is the ability to search. So this searches all the data that has ever gone through any of your workflows. So let's say you know a person bought something from you, but they didn't get the access they were supposed to get in your online course or something, and you knew their email address. You can type that in and you can see every workflow that has run with that person in it, and you can go through and debug. You don't get that in Integromat. In fact, if you go and look at the history of a workflow in Integromat, you can't even search within just this workflow. So that is something that saves me a lot of time when things go wrong in Zapier. Now let's have a look at pricing. So you can see here that there is a free plan for both Integromat and Zapier. Integromat pretty much only uses these 3 different metrics. So number of operations, data transfer, and interval. So operations means if we have a look at that workflow from before again, for every row that this operated on in that Google Sheet, this would be an operation, this would be an operation, and this would be an operation. So if we ran over 3 different rows, we'd have 1, 2, 3 times 3, which is 9 operations. The filter is not counted. And then if you are transferring data like images or files between your workflows, you have this data transfer as well as a metric. So that's just something you need to take into account. At Zapier, pricing is a little bit different. So they actually have different features available on different plans here. So you can see that if you want to create a multi-step workflow, you cannot do that on the free plan. On Integromat, you can. And there are just a few more limits, right? So the ability to auto replay workflows that have had something go wrong is only available on the plan at $49 and up. And you can also see the number of workflows you can have as limited. So we go to 5, 20, unlimited. But the main one here is the number of tasks. Generally, you'll find that's the main thing that's going to limit your account. So if you wanted to increase the number of tasks on that plan, it changes the price. Tasks are similar to operations in Integromat, but they're counted a little bit differently. So here's a workflow we had before. Now the trigger is never counted as a task. If you have a filter in here to say we only want to run this workflow again, like if the name is Bob from before. Now let's say the typeform triggered and this filter didn't pass, you wouldn't get charged any tasks for that at all. If the name was Bob, the trigger would fire, the filter would pass, and this action would happen. You would get charged 1 for the passing filter and 1 for the action. So that would cost you 2 tasks. So it's a little bit hard to compare the two just in operations and tasks because they do work differently. But the one thing to note there is Integromat doesn't limit you based on the number of workflows you've got or how many steps are in there. On the free plan, you can create as complex a workflow as you like. You might just run out of tasks because a complex workflow is going to use more operations. Now let's move on to building complex workflows. So in Zapier, you have this feature called Paths. So this is a pretty standard workflow here. A trigger, a filter, a few actions, and then we have this Paths section down here. So this is essentially like splitting this Zap into multiple workflows. So at this point, it's going to run A and B paths. And these are essentially just a filter at the start. So we say we run this path on these conditions, and then it's more actions. So it really just looks like a Zap within a Zap. So that's Zapier's answer to complex workflows. Now they're pretty limited. I think right now the number of paths you can have is 3. Beyond that, there are ways to trigger a workflow multiple times, but you have to start using a code by Zapier step using JavaScript. So yeah, getting pretty complicated there, or using webhooks to send data from this Zap into, say, 3 more Zaps that are triggered by the webhook and then run their workflows. So again, it's kind of like a workaround in Zapier to achieve a complex workflow, and that can get messy really quick. Whereas if we have a look at Integromat, this is a complex workflow that I've built for a client where we've got all kinds of things going on. Like if we were to build this in Zapier, like this section would be one workflow. This section would be another workflow. This section would be another workflow. So, you're going to have lots of different workflows just to achieve one thing. Whereas with this one, you can see it all happen on one screen, which is really nice, especially when you are testing this out. Like you saw the test before, and you can see the data actually flow through this in real time, which is really cool. So yeah, when you're building complex stuff, I mean, in my opinion, there's pretty much no question that Integromat is a better option. But for simple stuff, Zapier is just nicer to use in almost every way. Finally, I'd just like to cover a couple of advanced things. Now, one of the best things you can do in both Zapier and Integromat is create your own API calls. So even if Zapier or an Integromat don't have the specific integration that you need, sometimes you can actually build one manually if you are able to read API documentation and translate that into an action. Integromat do this really well. So basically any app almost, you have this ability to make an API call. And what that does is use your already authenticated account. So you're using Google Sheets, you've already signed in with your account. Then it just uses the authentication from that to make any API call that you want using that app, which can be super powerful if you know how to use that. And the other thing that Integromat has that Zapier doesn't is error handling. So if you open this one here, these directives are all error handling. So what we can say is if this step encounters an error, like for some reason the row wasn't updated in Google Sheets, what do we want to do? Do we just want to stop this from running? Do we want to ignore it and continue? Do we want to roll back any other changes we've made? So you can kind of drop these in and connect them together, and you could actually run entire different workflows based on whether there's been an error or not, which is kind of cool. I've needed that a couple of times before, but if you're getting into some really heavy workflows, that would definitely come in handy a lot. Those are all the major differences between Zapier and Integromat. They are quite hard to compare, as you've seen. They do things in different ways. Some things are possible in one, but not in the other. If I had to break it down, I would say that in integrations, Zapier probably wins just because it's got more apps, even though a lot of the time Integromat will have better integrations with a particular app. When it comes to features, Integromat's definitely a winner. There's so much more that is possible. You can build more complicated workflows. With usability, Zapier is a clear winner. It's just a lot nicer to use in general, and Integromat, it's one of those tools that kind of feels like it was designed by a developer rather than like a UX designer who's actually taking the user experience into account. When it comes to testing, the ability to test Zaps and look through the history, they're kind of a tie here. Zapier's got the ability to search, which is really helpful, but then Integromat's got the ability to watch the actual flow through the workflow. So, they both kind of have their pros and cons there. And when it comes to pricing, I think Integromat's the winner just because they have a much more generous free plan, and the prices go up pretty quickly with Zapier. And that's, I guess, because it's just the market leader. It's been around for the longest time, so they can kind of charge more. Overall, you can do a lot more with Integromat. It's just harder to use. So if you're just starting out, I would recommend you start with Zapier, and you can bring Integromat into the mix later on once you've got a bit more of an understanding about how to build workflows. But in the end, I think it's a pretty good idea to learn both, as I have accounts with both and I use them for different things. For most of my simple workflows or multi-step actions where they're still quite linear, as you saw in the workflow with Zapier, they're usually just one step after another. If it's a linear type workflow, I'll pretty much just always do it in Zapier. But if I need some complexity or iterating or error handling, any of that stuff, I'll do it in Integromat. So that's why it's kind of good to know both. That's it. If you are still watching, thank you for sticking around to the end. There was a lot of stuff to get through there, and I hope this has helped you make a decision. If you'd like to learn more about workflow automation, get some cool ideas on how to implement these things in your business, hit that red subscribe button below. I also have a blog at jimmyrose.me. There's a Zapier course there if you want to get started with Zapier, even if you've never used it before, all the way through to getting really advanced with Zapier. Check out my course. It's in the header at jimmyrose.me. That's it. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.